He should never have cried my name like that. Not after standing over my husband's grave and telling me I was too weak to keep my own land. Not after calling Thomas a fool in front of half the town. Not after looking me in the eye and saying the shed was nothing but a rusted coffin for a dead man's bad ideas. But there he was outside in the dark, pounding so hard on the door that the whole frame shook. "Anna, open up!" The wind screamed around the shed like it wanted to tear the world in half. Snow pushed through the cracks. Fen was already on his feet, growling low in his throat. My hand stayed on the iron bar across the inner door, cold and still. Then Marcus shouted again, and this time his voice broke. "The roof came down!" I closed my eyes. For one hard second, I thought of every cruel word he had handed me since Thomas died. Every look, every laugh, every time he talked about my future like it belonged to him. Then I heard something else, a child crying. Small, frightened, barely there under the storm. My fingers tightened on the bar. The man who tried to take my home was begging me to save his family. And all I could think was this: if I opened that door, nothing in this valley would stay the same again. I was 26 years old when they buried my husband. The ground was so frozen the shovels hit it like iron. Every scoop sounded wrong. Too sharp. Too final. The preacher kept talking, but the wind took half his words before they reached me. Peace, mercy, rest. None of it meant anything. I stood there with Fen pressed against my leg, and all I could feel was the cold moving deeper and deeper into my bones. Thomas had been gone 6 days, and a fever took him fast. 1 week he was sketching plans by lamplight and talking about spring like it was a promise already made. The next, he was burning up in our bed, his skin too hot, his breath too thin. And then he was gone, before I had even learned how to imagine this place without him. The people from town came, because that is what people do. They stood back in dark coats and watched me with those careful faces that are supposed to look kind, but never do. I could feel their pity landing on me like snow. A young widow, a lonely cabin, too much land, too much winter coming, not enough chance. Marcus stood closer than anyone else. He was Thomas's older brother, broad through the shoulders, loud in every room, and always certain he understood the world better than the rest of us. Even at the graveside. Oh, he looked less like a grieving man and more like someone measuring a fence line. When the last dirt hit the pine box, he put one hand on my shoulder. Heavy, public, possessive. "Anna," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "you can't manage this place alone." I did not answer. His thumb pressed once against my coat, like he was sealing the moment in place. "I'll give you a fair price," he went on. "Enough to get you back to the city where you belong." My eyes lifted then, not to him, to the edge of the property, to the old shed leaning into the winter sky with its rusted roof and crooked sides. It looked broken from a distance, small, useless, easy to dismiss. Marcus followed my gaze and gave a short laugh through his nose. "That old thing and these rocks aren't worth much," he said. "But for Thomas's sake, I'll take it off your hands." Some of the town heard him. I know they did. I felt the shift in the silence. He wanted everyone there to see what he was doing, not helping me, claiming the land, claiming the right to say what came next. I kept my face still, though something bitter rose in my throat. "This is not the time," I said. "It is exactly the time," he answered. "Winter doesn't care about grief." No, Winter did not care. But neither, I realized then, did Marcus. After the burial, The cabin became a place full of ghosts. Thomas was everywhere. In the chair he built with the uneven back leg he always meant to fix. In the coat hanging by the door, with sawdust still worked into the sleeve. In the cup beside the wash basin. In the silence after dark. Most of all, then he was in the places where his voice should have been. Fen stayed near me every hour. If I sat, he laid his head on my knee. If I stood, he followed. At night, he slept beside the bed, one ear always turned toward me, like he knew I might drift away if he did not keep watch. 3 days after the funeral, Marcus came to the cabin. He did not remove his boots. He did not lower his voice. He filled the doorway with cold air and certainty. "Have you thought about my offer?" I was standing by the stove, trying to coax flame from wood that did not want to catch. I did not turn around right away. "No," he gave a dry chuckle. "You should." I faced him then. I already answered. He looked around the room the way a man looks through a barn before buying it. His eyes touched every shelf, every tool, every patch Thomas and I had made with our own hands. He was not seeing memories. He was seeing value. "A woman alone cannot run a place like this," he said. "That's not cruelty. That's fact. You'll freeze before January." Anger moved through me so suddenly it almost felt like heat. "This is my home." "It was Thomas's dream," Marcus said. "That's different." "It was ours." He let out one sharp breath. "Anna, Thomas filled your head with hope because he could afford to. He was always chasing ideas." His chin tipped toward the window, toward the shed. "He spent more time in that scrap heap than he did being practical. You know it. That thing is nothing but a monument to failure." That was the moment something inside me changed. Not all at once, not loudly, more like a frozen river cracking under its own weight. But because the shed was the last place Thomas had stood when he still believed there was time. Late that summer, long before the fever, he took me out there under moonlight because he was too excited to sleep. I remember the look in his eyes more than the words at first. Bright, boyish, sure. He kicked lightly at the dirt floor. "Everyone keeps trying to fight winter from above," he told me. "That's the mistake." I laughed softly and folded my arms against the night air. "And what are we supposed to do instead?" He crouched and picked up a stick. "Join it." Then he drew in the dust. A room under the shed, deep in the ground, stone-lined walls, shelves cut into earth, a stove placed just right. One vent, one entrance. No drafty corners for the wind to find. He talked about the way the deep ground held its own temperature, and about shelter that did not stand in defiance of the storm, but disappeared beneath it. "This is only the cap," he said, tapping the floor with the stick. "The real house is underneath." I had listened because I loved hearing him dream. I did not know then that he was not dreaming. Marcus heard about it once and laughed until tears came to his eyes. "A house for worms," he said. "You planning to bury your wife before she's dead?" I should have hated him then. Maybe I did a little. But grief changes the shape of old feelings. After Thomas died, that memory did not feel like an insult anymore. It felt like a challenge. The morning after Marcus called the shed a monument to failure, I found the key. Thomas had hidden it on a narrow ledge inside the chimney, where only someone cleaning soot by hand would ever notice it. It was heavy iron, dark with age, rough with rust, and colder than anything else in the room. I stood there staring at it in my palm. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. Because Thomas had left it for me. Not for Marcus, not for the town, not for some future buyer with strong hands and loud opinions. For me. Fen whined softly at my feet, as if he felt the air change. I closed my fingers around the key and looked out through the window at the shed standing alone against the pale winter light. Everybody in town thought I was finished. A widow, a burden, a woman one bad storm away from surrender. But that key did not feel like the end of something. It felt like a door. By noon, I had my coat on, a shovel over one shoulder, the pickaxe in my right hand, and Fen trotting beside me through the hard white grass. And the lock on the shed groaned when I turned the key. The sound was long and low, like something waking up after years of silence. The door opened inward. Dust hung in the light. The dirt floor was packed tight. The place smelled like dry wood, old metal, and waiting. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. For a moment, the quiet was so deep it almost scared me. Then I looked down at the center of the floor, right where Thomas had once traced the shape of another life with a stick. My hands were shaking. My heart was broken. I was alone. But I raised the pickaxe anyway, and brought it down. The first strike barely left a mark. The dirt floor answered me with a dull, stubborn thud that ran up my arms and into my shoulders. I hit it again, then again. By the sixth swing, my breath was already turning rough. By the 10th, my palms stung. All I had to show for it was a shallow scar in the earth and a feeling I could not name. Not hope. Something harder than hope. The ground inside that shed had been packed for years, maybe longer. It did not want to open for me. Every inch had to be argued with. So I argued. Each morning I fed Fen, split what wood I could, and did the few chores that still mattered above ground. Then I took the shovel and the pickaxe to the shed and went down into the same battle. Swing, crack, pry, shovel, again, again, again. At night, I could barely lift my hands to unbutton my coat. The blisters came first. Then the skin broke. Then the torn places hardened. I stopped noticing the pain after a while, or maybe I made peace with it. The grief had already taught me that the body could keep moving long after the heart wanted to lie down and stay still. Fen stayed with me through all of it. He would lie in the doorway for hours, head on his paws, eyes alert. If a wagon rolled by on the road below, one ear lifted. If the wind changed, he noticed before I did. Once, when I sat on an overturned crate, because my back had locked so hard I could not stand straight, he came over and pressed his warm side against my leg until the shaking passed. I talked to him more than I talked to any person, not because I had forgotten how to speak, because there was no one else I trusted to hear me. After 4 days, I had dug deep enough to see the earth change color. The top layer was pale and dry and tight as brick. Underneath it, the soil darkened. It grew cooler, richer, easier to move in chunks instead of dust. When I lifted it, the smell changed too. Less like an old shed, more like creek banks after rain. Clean and deep and alive in some hidden way. Thomas had been right about that part too. The thought hit me so sharply I had to stop working. I leaned on the shovel and looked down into the hole I was cutting into the center of his plan. My chest tightened. For one wild second I could almost hear his voice behind me, calm and sure, explaining where the wall should go, how deep was deep enough, why the ground itself could be kinder than timber if you knew how to ask it right. I wanted him so badly in that moment, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. But tears had become expensive. I could not spare many of them anymore. So I wiped my face with the back of my wrist and kept digging. Word spread, of course. Nothing stays private in a small town, especially not grief. Grief makes people curious. So does a woman doing work they believe belongs to a man. At the general store, conversations would thin when I entered. Not stop, just thin enough for me to feel the shape of them. I would hand over coins for flour or salt, and hear the whispers begin again before the door shut behind me. She's digging under the shed. Poor thing lost her senses with him. Mark my words, they'll find her frozen down there, come winter. One afternoon, 2 boys ran past the edge of my land and shouted, "How's the dirt palace, Widow Anna?" Fen shot after them, with a bark so fierce they nearly fell over themselves trying to get away. I called him back, and he returned at once. But I still stood there, with my jaw tight, and my hands balled inside my sleeves. It was not the boys that hurt. It was hearing the town give me a new shape. Not wife, not farmer, not neighbor. Madwoman. I should have been used to being underestimated by then. But there is a special kind of loneliness in knowing people have mistaken your survival for insanity. The hole deepened. Soon I needed a ladder to climb down in and out. I carved rough steps first, then changed them when they began to crumble. I learned quickly that wanting a shelter and building one were not the same thing. The earth had rules. If I cut one side too steep, it shed loose soil in the night. If I stacked tools carelessly, dirt swallowed them. If I pushed past exhaustion, I got stupid, and stupid was dangerous underground. So I slowed down enough to learn. I hauled stones from the creek a little at a time. That was worse than the digging. The flat ones were best, but the flat ones were always the heaviest. I used an old hand sled Thomas had repaired the previous winter, dragging stone after stone across rough ground, while the first bite of real cold moved into the air. Some mornings, I could see my breath from the minute I stepped outside. The grass whitened early. The wind sharpened. The sky changed its mood faster than I liked. Inside the pit, I began lining the walls. No part of it looked clever at first. Just stone, mud, labor. I pressed clay between the gaps with aching fingers and fit each piece the way Thomas once fit shelves into the cabin wall. Careful and patient, and always thinking ahead to the strain a thing might bear later. That was when Marcus came again, and I was at the creek, bent over a broad, flat stone, trying to lever it onto the sled without breaking my foot. Fen started growling before I heard the horse. Marcus reined in a few yards away and stared at me like I had become a stranger. "For God's sake, Anna." I kept working. He climbed down from the wagon and came closer. "Look at you." I straightened slowly, one hand pressed to my lower back. He shook his head. "You're hauling rocks now?" "I need them." "For what? To make your grave prettier?" The words landed hard, but not where he wanted them to. I looked at him over the stone between us. "You seem very concerned with where I bury myself." His mouth tightened. "This isn't a joke." "No," I said, "it isn't." He came another step nearer, lowering his voice like that made it kinder. The first real snow hasn't even fallen yet, and you already look half-starved. You cannot do this alone." "I am doing it." He glanced toward the homestead, toward the shed, hidden by distance and slope. "That madness needs to stop." The old Anna might have fallen quiet then, not from weakness, from caution, from trying to survive men like Marcus by not giving them anything to push against. But grief had burned that caution out of me. "Thomas was not mad," I said. Marcus let out a breath through his nose. "Thomas is dead." The air between us changed. Even Fen rose to his feet. I do not know if Marcus saw it in my face or just felt it in the silence, but he took a step back. I moved closer instead. "He is dead," I said. "And still, he has done more to protect me than any living man in this valley." Marcus stared at me. I think he expected tears, collapse, pleading. What he got was a woman with mud on her skirt, wind in her face, and both hands steady on a stone she had dragged out of a freezing creek by herself. "You want this land?" I asked quietly. "Then pray for my failure, because I will not hand it to you." He stood there a moment longer, jaw tight, pride working through him like poison. Then he climbed back into the wagon. "When winter comes," he said, gathering the reins, "don't expect me to dig you back out." I watched him go. Then I bent, fixed both hands under the edge of the stone, and lifted until the sled creaked under the weight. By the time the first heavy snow came, the room under the shed was no longer just a hole. It was beginning to look like shelter. Not finished, not safe enough yet, but real. The walls held, yet the shelves were cut. Firewood was stacked inside under cover. Sacks of beans, flour, dried apples, and smoked fish had been moved where damp would not ruin them. I had even set the base for Thomas's small stove, though getting the vent right still worried me. Every night I looked at what remained undone and felt fear start its slow crawl through my chest. Winter was coming faster now, and I still did not know if I was building a refuge or betting my life on a dead man's last idea. The warning came in the way the world went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not the soft kind that settles after sunset. This was the kind that makes your skin tighten before your mind understands why. The birds disappeared first. Then even the wind seemed to pull back, like the whole valley was holding its breath. I was in the cabin patching one of Thomas's old wool blankets when Fen lifted his head and gave a low sound deep in his throat. I looked toward the window. The sky had turned the color of bruised iron. By dusk, the first snow hit. Not a gentle fall. Not pretty. It came sideways, hard and fast, driven by a wind that found every weak place in the cabin at once. The walls began to creak. Cold air slipped through seams I had stuffed twice already. Fen paced from door to stove and back again, unable to settle. I fed the fire until the little room felt dry and sharp with heat, but the warmth never held. It was like trying to warm yourself while standing inside a broken lantern. That night I did not sleep much. Every sound felt personal. The roof groaned. The shutters rattled. Something loose outside kept slamming in the wind. I lay there, under blankets with Fen pressed against my legs, and listened to winter test the house board by board. By morning, the world beyond the window had vanished. White. Nothing but white and motion. I tried the front door, and it did not move. A hard pulse of fear went through me. I put my shoulder against it and shoved again. Still nothing. Snow had packed against the cabin like stone. It was not a drift anymore. It was a wall. Fen barked once. "I know," I whispered, though my throat had gone dry. Then I climbed onto the table and scraped frost from the corner of the window with my sleeve. Outside, the snow was nearly level with the glass. I could see only storm and the faint shape of the shed roof rising higher than the cabin, dark against the white. That sight decided it for me. The cabin was done. Maybe not today. Maybe not in the next hour. But I saw it clearly then. All those wooden walls I had once trusted were only one bad winter away from becoming a box that buried me alive. Thomas had known it. I dropped from the table, pulled on my coat, and moved fast. Food first. Blankets, oil, matches, the kettle, the small jar of honey I had been saving without admitting why. 2 extra pairs of socks, my father's knife, Thomas's notebook. I wrapped what I could in canvas and tied it off with shaking fingers. Yet then I opened the back window as far as it would go and started shoving things through into the storm. The snow outside came to my waist. Cold hit so hard, it stole breath from my chest. Fen jumped down first and nearly vanished. I climbed after him, dragging the bundle and fought my way through the drift toward the shed. Every step felt wrong. Not like walking, like forcing myself through water that wanted me under. The shed door was half buried, but not sealed. I dug with my hands when the shovel snagged. I got it open wide enough to squeeze in, then hauled the bundle after me. Fen scrambled through beside me, throwing snow from his coat the moment we reached the inner steps. When I dropped into the underground room, the silence hit me so suddenly I almost cried. Above us, the storm was still raging. I knew it was. I could hear a low, distant hum through the earth, like a giant animal turning in sleep. But down there, the air held still. The walls held still. The lamp flame held steady. I lit the stove with fingers that barely worked. When the first real warmth touched my face, I sat down hard on the low stool Thomas had built for measuring floor height and covered my mouth with both hands. Not because I was afraid, because he had been right. Every shelf, every stone, every inch of depth. He had seen it all before I did, and somehow the truth of that felt like grief and comfort at the same time. Fen curled near the stove with his nose tucked under his tail. His breathing slowed. Mine did too. For 2 days, I barely left the underground room. There was no reason to. The storm did not let up. It kept going, hour after hour, until time lost shape. I fed the stove. I checked the vent. I rationed food. I drank broth from a tin cup and listened to the wind hunt across the surface above me. Sometimes I talked out loud just to hear a human voice. I told Fen stories about Thomas, about the summer he planted too early and swore the tomatoes would prove everyone wrong, about the night we danced in the kitchen while bread burned in the oven, about the way he never looked at land and saw limits. Only questions. I had loved that about him. I had feared it too. But down there in the warm belly of the earth, with death moving over us in white waves, I understood something I had missed while he was alive. Thomas was not careless. He was brave in a way practical people often mistake for foolishness. On the third night, the knocking started. Not soft, not uncertain, the desperate. Fen sprang up barking. I froze with one hand on the poker. For a second, I thought the storm had torn something loose above us. Then I heard it again. 3 hard blows. Then a voice, ragged and half lost in the wind. "Anna!" Marcus. I did not move. He shouted again, weaker this time. "Anna, please! Please!" I had never heard that word in his mouth where I was concerned. Then came another sound. A child crying. The storm fell away after that. Or maybe my anger did. I took the lamp, climbed the earthen steps, and lifted the bar. The shed door fought me when I pulled it open. Wind threw snow into my face. Marcus stumbled inside so hard, he nearly knocked me over. His beard was crusted with ice. One side of his face was white with cold. Behind him came Sarah, his wife, bent over against the storm, but clutching their little boy beneath a blanket stiff with snow. "The roof came down," Marcus gasped. "We tried to stay. We couldn't." The boy was shivering so hard, his teeth clicked. I stepped aside at once. "Inside," I said. Sarah did not even speak. She just grabbed my arm once as she passed, like she needed to know I was real. Marcus carried the child down the steps, ducking low, and then all 3 of them stood in the underground room, blinking at the warmth, the shelves, the stove, the clean, dry walls. Marcus turned slowly. I watched the exact moment understanding hit him. This was the place he had mocked. This was the place that was going to save his family. I took the boy from his arms and wrapped him in one of my blankets. "Sit him by the stove, not too close." My voice came out calm, almost strange to my own ears. "Sarah," I'll rub his hands. "Marcus, shut the door tight behind you." He obeyed without a word. Later, after tea and broth, and long minutes of the child slowly warming back into himself, Sarah began to cry. Quietly at first, then with her whole body shaking. Marcus sat on a crate with both hands over his face. No one looked at me with pity anymore. No one tried to tell me what I could not do. The room stayed quiet except for the stove and the storm above us. Then the little boy looked up at me from under the blanket and said in a small, cracked voice, "Papa said your house was foolish." Marcus flinched like he had been struck. The child kept looking at me. "But foolish houses don't save people." I did not answer right away. I just tucked the blanket tighter around his shoulders and glanced once at Marcus. And then I said the only truth that mattered. "No, they don't."